Hello, in this episode we're going to look at how to equip inventory items with a custom server using Unreal Engine. So there's a blog post covering the step-by-step on how I managed to achieve this, and this is connected to one of the previous episodes in chapter 17 where I've implemented a Java server to support this functionality for equipping and unequipping the items. So in this one we're basically looking at how to leverage those new APIs to basically implement them in Unreal Engine. So all of the blueprints I've basically referenced in this blog post, so do check that out if you want to implement something similar. And the code is available in GitHub, so feel free to check this out locally and try it out. So you can see the server's running locally for me right now. And essentially what we're doing is integrating these three endpoints, so get equipped items, equip item, and unequip item into our Unreal project. Right, so these are all linked to the inventory, right? So these ones are covered in the previous episode. So I'll give you a quick demonstration of what it is that we've built so far, and you can see whether you'd like to do something similar. Okay, so we have now an inventory system. So we have a couple of items, and what we have now is when we right click, we get this menu to either equip or drop an item. So if we click drop, as before, it will appear on the screen, so I'm able to also pick them up, as you can see. And I'm also able to click equip, and it will change the items on the equipped slots. And do that again, change that again, and it puts the older item back into the inventory. I can also double click and it will do the same thing, right? So that's what we're going to be implementing. And also if you double click on the equipped slot, it puts it back into your inventory. So as usual, everything is persisted. So for example, I've equipped an item and I've dropped one, so that if I restart the game, you can see it's loaded back in. So there's my equipped item and there's the other item on the map. So that's what we're going to be looking at building here. So yeah, let's get started. So all the blueprints here mostly are the same. There's one new one, which is the slot menu widget. So this widget is basically just a small widget with two buttons. That's pretty much all it is. And maybe the first thing that I'll do is look at how did we spawn it in our inventory, right? So basically the idea is that once we right click our styled inventory slot, so this component over here, we want this menu to appear. So inside this menu, it has a button. But frustratingly, these buttons don't have on right-clicked event, right? So what we can do is, if we go into the graph view, we can click add, and then on override function, there'll be one for OnMouseButtonDown. So you won't see that right now because I've got some functions implemented, but essentially if you have them not implemented. So you can see like the on mouse button up is here again. So if you click on this, you'll get something like this, but you want on mouse button down, right? So with that, you'll have something like this put in place, and then you'll want to implement some functionality. So for example, from the mouse event, you can do is mouse button down, and you'll just have to specify the right mouse button. So just check if that's true. And if it is, you want to create the menu widget. So you'll see that I've added two extra variables here, so part of the constructor. And the way you add components to a constructor is inside the graph view. When you create new variables, you can select them to be instance editable and exposed on spawn. So that's how you add them to the constructor. And yeah, once you've done that, essentially when you have create widget of a class, by default, obviously they don't appear, but once you select once you select it, they'll appear, right? So that's how we do it. So I provide a reference to this component, the inventory slot, and I also give the character item. This is because when I'm dropping the item, I need the reference to the item that I'm dropping. And I also pass itself because I want to be able to equip an item from two places. One when you double click the slot, and the other one from the menu. So rather than copying and pasting the code in two places, I just pass a reference to self in order to call the same function from the menu. So that's why I passed itself. So once you've created the widget, I promoted it to a variable. I added it to the viewport. And if you were to stop there, it will just appear on the top left of the screen. So the other thing I wanted to do is position it next to the mouse. So what you can do is get the mouse position on the viewport. This gives you the X and Y coordinates of the mouse. And I also provided a little offset, right? So unless you provide an offset, it's going to appear it's going to start from the top left of the mouse and it's going to go down. So I give it an offset just so it's positioned a little bit, a bit more central, but I didn't want it to be straight bang in the middle, right? So that's why it's a small offset here. And then I also set the position in the viewport. What you want to make sure here is that this guy is disabled. And the reason for that is, so what you'll see here, it will work fine now. So if you right click, it appears in scale. And then if you make this smaller, it again appears correctly. But if you were to enable this, which it is by default, if you move away from full screen, it's going to have this dodgy offset, right? So it's not going to look right, but it will. Okay, well, it should have, I think, worked fine on a full screen. Let's just test that again. Okay, it doesn't. So you basically want to make sure that this is disabled, and that will fix a lot of these scaling issues. So this provides auto scaling. And that's it for how to display the menu. Okay, so now let's have a look into the menu itself. So this is the designer view. So like I say, I've got two buttons. What you essentially want to do is handle these on clicked events. So for example, here, if I click on that, it will take me to the blueprint for handling the equip press. And I've kept this class quite lean because I'm essentially using blueprints from other classes, right? So I don't want to be repeating any code. I want to be reusing it from other classes. So that's what we're doing here. Perhaps before I get into these, it's worth calling out that I close the menu when the mouse leaves the menu, right? So what this means is that if I right click this, I get the menu, and the mouse moves away from the menu, it will automatically close. This is much easier than me handling like on-click events in the world, which is also possible, but I just wanted to keep this class really lean right now because you'll need to create custom event handlers, and I didn't want to do that at this stage. So perhaps in the near future, I'll implement this and maybe I'll make a separate short video to cover it. But for now, I wanted to keep this really sort of quite minimal. So that's what we have so far. Okay, so when you click drop, we've actually covered this in one of the previous episodes, but this functionality exists inside the top-down character controller. So it's the character which is dropping the item. And to be honest, there's not really like one right place, or at least I'm not sure if the top-down character is the right place, but it's a good place because when you drop an item, I drop it at the character location. And I was thinking perhaps in the future, there'll be some custom events which force you to drop some items, maybe like through an NPC or a monster or whatever. So that's why I put it there, so that it's easy access for other blueprints, but it could live in other places, right? So it's in there right now, so that's why we get the player character, cast to top-down character, and it requires the character item in order to execute it. So let's have a look at what it does. And the blueprint really is just an API call to drop an item. So the one that we're replicating is this call over here, which is a post request to this inventory drop endpoint, and we need to replicate this data. So as usual, we've got these three headers to add as well, so they'll be across all of my APIs, and the headers are for content type, accept, and most importantly the character name. So this is the header which specifies what character to execute these functions on. So that's what we have here. So I construct a JSON request, I set it to post, and I then set my three headers, right? Content type, accept, and the character name. Once I've done that, I start preparing my data request object, which is essentially the location of where to drop the item. So I get the actor location. I then get the X, Y, and Z coordinates from that, and I have a static map, right? So I only use one map at the moment, so that's why I hard-coded it in, but it could be dynamic, taken from game mode or something like that. I also need the character name, so this is just, again, hard-coded at this point. And finally, the character item. So this is dynamic. So I'm passing this from the inventory slot to the slot menu, which then goes to the top-down character. So there's multiple ways of getting this, but this is the way that I've chosen here. And once you've applied this data, so once you've constructed this body, you can then start sending the request. So set request object just links the request that we've created to JSON, and then sets it, and then apply URL. So this URL is the same one, inventory drop. And once it's completed, I want to refresh my inventory. So in order to refresh it, this is also in the top-down character controller, I just basically fetch my inventory component. So there's always going to be one. Get all widgets of class. I get the first one, and then I tell it to effectively reconstruct itself. So what this means is that it's going to make a call to get the inventory items, and anything new it will add, anything that's been removed it will destroy. So it just reconciles itself. It doesn't just rebuild everything. So there's a bit of a complex sort of logic to iterate through all the data. It's using some caching to do that. I've covered it in a separate video, so I won't go into too much detail, but it's just collecting the data, and then for each piece of item, draw a new widget component. For anything that's gone, just remove it. Okay, so that's the inventory contents and the top-down character. And the next button is to equip an item. So when you click that, you can see I'm referencing the parent slot. So that means the styled inventory slot. And I'm telling it to equip the item that's currently in that slot. So after both of these calls, I also remove this menu from the parent. So once you've handled, when you click equip or you click drop, you want that menu to disappear. So that's what this one does. Okay, so let's have a look at equip item with API. So this is a new function. So I'll go into a bit more detail for this one. So equip call is handled over here, and thankfully it's quite simple. It's fairly straightforward. You have this URL here, equip/equip, and all I need to give it is the item instance ID in this case. So that's what we're going to be implementing. So we have a construct JSON request using the VA REST subsystem. It's a JSON and a post request. I then set my three headers, so content type, accept, and character name. And once that's done, I create my JSON for the body, which we just saw is this item instance ID. So that's what I've done here. So make JSON make a JSON object, then promote it to a variable, and then I have to just set a string field. And the string field contains this item instance ID. So all I need to do is get my item that's currently in my slot, and basically look for that item instance ID. So that's what I get here through my structures. And once I've set it, I set the request object, or rather I link this JSON to this request object, and I apply the URL. So the URL, as expected, is equip/equip. And once that's completed, I want to go ahead and refresh my inventory. So this one exists inside styled inventory slot. So I didn't refactor this one to be universal because some of these refreshes could be a bit different. So this one wants to refresh the inventory, but it also wants to refresh the equipped items widget as well. So refreshing the inventory is exactly the same that you saw before. So each of the slots, they have a reference to the main inventory. So to be fair, I could have obtained the inventory by find widget by class, but I've actually passed in a reference. So it could be done in multiple ways as usual. It could even be stored in a game mode. I think that's a fairly popular way of doing it. So basically you put all the widget references inside the game mode because you'll always have just one, and then you fetch them out of there. So that's one way of doing it as well. Yep, so you call the get inventory event, which is, like I say, it's basically a constructor for the inventory. And then I also refresh the equipped widget. Okay, so this one is getting the equipped items widget, which is this one over here. So this widget contains all of the equipped slots, and it basically tells it to refresh itself. It's a very similar call to the inventory one, but now for the equipped items rather than the items in my inventory. So I'll go back to here. I'll go over the equipped items shortly in like a minute or so. So yeah, you find the equipped items and you tell it to, well, actually we're covering it now. Okay, so you basically tell it to fetch all the equipped items. And the way we do that is via the other call, right? So it's this one over here. So it's a get call and it's get equipped items. So you can see this over here. So v1 / equipped get request. So get requests don't have a body, but they do have these headers. So you're getting the equipped items for this character, right? So that's what it's implementing here. And this is the response that we're expecting. So it's a relatively complicated response, but the request body is really simple, or it's basically none. So that's what we're replicating over here. And what we do is we create a JSON request, and it's a get request, promote it to a variable, set the 3 headers as usual, so the content type, accept character name, and then we apply the URL. When you apply the URL, that's the function that actually executes it. And here we care about the response, obviously. So once it's completed, I'm starting to cache the response. So this is in order to reconcile what we already have in our equipped slots and what we don't. And we're going to be iterating through each one to see whether we need to add it. So that's what this one does. Perhaps the first thing that I want to point out is I'll go into this a little bit more detail actually. So the result here will look exactly like this. In fact, yeah, this is the result that I'd be getting right now. And you can see inside the JSON, there's an array field. So you can see there's a square bracket here, an array field called equipped items list. Okay, so that's what we're doing here, right? It says get array field, equipped items list. So it's super useful to be having a tool like Postman here so that you can be sort of cross-referencing all of these functionalities as you're going through. So once we get this array, I go through each item inside that array, I convert it to an object, and I convert it to a equippable item. So what does this mean? So inside this array, there's a bunch of objects. So objects means anything in these curly brackets. So at the moment there's just one actually. And this object has a couple of fields. One of them is a character name. The other one is a complex object called item instance. And then the last one is category. So on the bright side, the item instance object has already a helper method inside our code. So we just need to create a helper to, well, let's have a look around now. So convert to equippable item. Actually, before I do that, I'll just show you the model. So whenever you're working with an API, it's super useful to be having model representations for the data that you're going to be using. So you can see here I've created a structure with a character name, item instance, and category. So the item instance already existed, right? So it's referring to an item instance object. So it's this one over here, right? So item ID, item instance ID, and then item. And yeah, that's what we're going to be building using one of those helpers. So if I go back into here, so that's the helper method which will create it. So you can see again cross-referencing it with here. Character name is a string field, category is a string field, and then you have the item instance. So that's what we're going to be creating from JSON into Unreal Engine structures. So from the input, or rather the output of the API, we're basically getting the character name, so get string field, we're getting the category, get a string field, and then we get the object for the item instance, and we already had a helper created before to convert to item instance. So we're just leveraging off that. And then you create the structure populated with the data, and then you return. So that's how we convert to equippable item. And then I added to a map referencing any new equipped items. So once this is all complete, I'm calling another custom event. So again, to create a custom event, just type custom event and give it a name. And we get taken to over here. So this functionality is quite similar to the one in the inventory system. So this is basically where we have two maps, one of them for the new equip items and one of them is for the current equip items. And we basically check, is there a difference between the two? And if there is, just process the difference. So that's what we're trying to do over here. So we have the new equip items. We say for each one of those using the keys, we check if the equip item map contains that item, and if it doesn't, we get the equip slot by category. Okay, so this one is relatively important. So equipped items contains a field called category, so we can get the equip slot by category. Just to reference, the category refers to this one over here. And this is a bit of a tedious function, but inside the this component, which essentially has all of these components, I created a static function, so you can just click override, click create a new function to create something that returns those types, right? So I have a switch statement and I provide it a category. And what happens is if the category is equal to belt, return the belt slot, right? If it's equal to the cape, return the cape slot. So this is pretty much the neatest way I found. If you've got a better way, do suggest it in the comments, because I didn't really see one. This seems a bit of a, well, basically nasty way. It's kind of tedious, right? If you had 100 slots, I don't imagine this scales very well. I'm kind of on the limit here, right? Like for the comfort zone, right? If I had many more, I'd probably be digging a bit deeper to see if there's an alternate solution. But anyway, so that's what we've got here. So we're getting the equip slot by category, and then we basically set the item instance to that slot. So that's how we basically define what image to draw in that slot, right? We get the slot and we say draw this item, right? And then we call refresh widget. So we call the refresh widget off this one. So again, to confirm, we get the slot, and I'll show you what the slot is actually, so that would help. So we get the slot, which is the inventory slot, inventory equipped item slot, sorry. So if we go into here, each one of these guys is this one over here. And inside the graph, we're able to see a couple of things, a couple of useful things. So one of them is the empty widget icon. One of them is the item instance. I think these two are the main things that we need to focus on. So if I go back to the graph, so you see we're here overriding the item instance and then telling it to refresh the widget. So if I go into here, we'll go into the inventory equip slot. So just to confirm, it's this widget over here. And if we can see in the constructor and then into refresh widget. So in the constructor, we create the rotating widget, which is the same one that's used in the styled inventory slot. So if you go into here, you'll be able to see this item rotating widget, which is able to show the item, right? So we create this dynamically here. And the reason why is because we either want to show the item or we want to show an empty icon, right? So if you have a weapon equipped, we want to show the weapon. If there is no weapon equipped, we want to show an empty icon. So that's why we prepare this widget in the constructor, but we don't automatically assign it because we require to specify what item to draw here. Then it also calls the refresh widget. So here we have a check, like an if statement. Is the item instance set? So this is a bit of a hack for is valid. So as I found out, structures can't be null inside Unreal Engine, so they'll always be constructed with some default values. So I basically just check, is my item ID equal to basically anything, right? Is the length more than 0? So that's how I check if an item instance is set here. If it is set, then I populate the rotating widget with the item instance object, right? So this is where I determine what icon to draw here, right? So I give it this thing and I fit it inside the content box. So inside my designer view, you can see this widget simply has a size box, there's a button and a content box. So I basically draw any image inside the content box. So that's what we have here. I basically squeeze in one of these item rotating images inside that content box. And if I don't have an item instance set, I basically default to the empty widget icon. So to verify, and it does pretty much the same thing, right? I create an empty widget icon and then I fit it inside my content box. So if I go into the equipped items widget and I select one of these guys, so any one of these, you can see that the default value here for the empty widget icon is set to some icon, right? So these icons, for example, let's have a look through content, empty. So it could be like these icons over here, right? So it's just basically an image, right? But inside a widget with an image parameter, and it's just got a static image. That's what those are. Okay, and that effectively completes that part. So I think we looked at majority of the code. There's one last thing left, which is to unequip the item. So when you now double click this icon, so double click this widget, we want to also drop the item, right? So this happens, there is actually no double click event here as well, right? So this is another limitation for buttons, but you can see there's on clicked, on pressed, etc. But there isn't on double click. So what we can do is click this and we'll be able to create our own custom one. So basically, I had to sort of hack a little solution. It's not too complicated, probably the easiest one I found, but still it's a bit tedious, right? So I basically created a new variable, it's called button pressed, and when I click, if it's not already set, I'm going to set it to true and apply a delay of 0.3 seconds, such that if you click it within 0.3 seconds, it's effectively a double click. It will go into here and handle unequip item. So I want to also point out that, you know, that there are some things for like on mouse double click events here, for example, right? So you might think, okay, well, this should work, right? But annoyingly, the button component actually consumes these left click events, so this doesn't actually work. So it's worth mentioning this because ideally you would maybe at least use this, but this also doesn't work. There's other limitations from buttons, for example, when you're dragging, when you try and implement a drag event, the button also consumes that mouse input. So that's why I think I mentioned in the blog post, it might actually be better to use a border component instead. But I've used some cool styling with these. So basically you see I've got normal, hovered, pressed styling, and I'd like to keep them for now. But you are actually able to use border components, right? So if I apply one of these, so I'll just demonstrate it quickly, right? You have a border component, and border components actually have these on mouse button down events as well, right? So you could actually use them very similar to buttons, and you can basically take all the styling from a button and apply it to the border event. So it looks just like a button, right? But the limitation here is that you can see there isn't a different behavior for when the mouse is hovered, when the mouse is clicked. You can implement them, but you'll have to do them inside blueprints, right? So you'll have to implement your own events internally and then update styling manually. So that's the limitation of using border as a button. But actually it has a lot of other pros, so do check that out. It might save you some trouble because, like I say, now I want to implement drag and I've got some problems because of this button, so I might actually change this to a border in the future. So you know, both ways have their pros and cons basically, so yeah, choose the one that suits you best. Okay, so going back, when I click this button, so I click my equip slot button, I check whether it's a double click. I then handle my unequip call. So all like this is the final call then. So this is the unequip one. We looked at get equipped items. We looked at equip the item, and now we're looking at the unequip item. So very similar. This is a post JSON request using the VA REST subsystem, promote this request object to a variable, set the 3 headers, and in a very similar fashion to equip, what we want to do is create a JSON object for the unequipped request data, and we just have to set the item instance ID. So that's the same thing that we needed to do for the other one. And once this is set, you set the request object to the request over here, and you call the equipped/unequipped call. So once this is completed, you're not actually interested in the result. You might try and process this, but really you want to refresh everything. So for instance, if you were to equip a 2-handed weapon, you might remove 2 slots out of your inventory, and whatever else that happens, right? So you want to resynchronize all of these components. So that's why we call refresh inventory, refresh itself, and then refresh the equipped widget. So quite a few refreshes here. So refresh inventory, get all widgets of class, and then you get the inventory event. So this is the same one that we did before. So the constructor for the inventory. Next, you want to, is this the wrong one? Refresh. The next one, refresh self. So this is basically setting the item instance to be null. This is because if you remember, like, we're not clearing the item instance by default. So you basically say, okay, well, refresh itself because you've now unequipped the item, so you want to remove it. And then you call the refresh widget for the equip slot. So, okay, well, this is part of itself, right? So you basically remove this item instance, and you say to refresh itself, right? Like, should it have an icon, should it not? And basically it should not. It should just draw the empty widget icon. So that's what this is doing right now. And finally, refresh the equipped widget. So this is getting all widgets of class. So it finds the equipped items, and then it calls the API to get all equipped items. So this is really to resynchronize itself with the server just in case anything goes amiss. And like I say, one of the main reasons to do that rather than just processing the response is in case you modify more than one slot, right? So there are instances where, like I mentioned with a 2-handed weapon, where you could be modifying 2 slots at one time. So you could either put everything into the response object, but that could make things more complicated. So maybe long term, you might want to reduce the number of API calls so you can change it. But for now, I'm not going to see any performance issues here. And this is more for learning anyway. So I'm able to reuse these refresh calls. So I think that just about covers everything. I'm pretty sure I basically looked at all of the functionality. Yeah, it looks like it. So that's it for this episode. Hope you found it useful, and see you next time. Thanks.